the entire group. Boy, sitting with you guys is like putting my face in front of a fire hydrant and just trying to get something to drink. It's too much. So much coming at you. So I have my timer going. I'm going to try to give you 20 minutes of just thoughts that I have about this health and wellness conference. Yes, my background is more of a business and entrepreneurial, but I want to fill a role today and talk about my view of health and wellness. And I'll start by going back about 100 years ago to 1918. And at that time, America was gripped in the beginning of what would be one of the worst pandemics of its history, culminating into a worldwide pandemic. We lost over 50 million people throughout the world, at least an estimated 50 million people. Can you imagine that today? 50 million people dying because of it was Spanish flu at the time, or the influenza pandemic. But in 1918, we had a pandemic. Also in America, we lost to this pandemic. It began in the fall, I'm sorry, of 20, of 1918, and it ended around the spring of 1919. Devastated the economy, caused everything to shut down. The economy had been built up the previous few years because while they were going through the war, America had built a war economy. We were producing products and services to support the war. And the war ended a couple of years early, and the economy was going along great. Then the pandemic hit and just took everything off kilter. So many people died. There was so much unemployment. Economy was broken. Nothing worked properly. So it was just, you can imagine, 675 people lost their lives in this country alone, and worldwide 50 million. It was a worldwide major pandemic. Today, 100 years later, we are experiencing a similar situation with the COVID-19 pandemic. We have right now, presently, about 2.5 million people worldwide have died. And of that number, 506,000 Americans have lost their lives to this pandemic. Of that group, 8 out of 10 of the deaths that have occurred have been senior citizens over the age of 65. So roughly 80% of the people that have died in America have been senior citizens over 65. So there are approximately 19 viruses or more that currently live in the human. We're not really aware of these because no one talks about these viruses until the pandemic happened. But there are 19 of them approximately that in our bodies throughout the world for every human being. Our world is full of viruses. There are countless today and have always existed throughout the world. The number is innumerable. They say exceeds a quadrillion, whatever that means, however many that is. But the fact is that there are viruses that live throughout the world, and there are about 19 categories of viruses that live in our physiology today. So we're living under a very difficult circumstance, and this conference is warranted to talk about health and wellness, because as we struggle to deal with the impact of these viruses and how it's impacted, I just want to share a perspective with you guys. 40% now, immediately after the 1921, what occurred was a recovery of the economy. And we had what was called the Roaring 20s. Probably many of you have heard of the Roaring 20s. It was a period of about 7 years, from 1921 till about 1929. The economic crash, the Great Depression hit. But during that 7-year period, right after the pandemic, the economy in America was booming. Everyone was just so excited about the opportunities. The banks began to loan credit. We began to sell products and services internationally, overseas to all these other countries. And our economy was built upon the stock market, the power of the stock market, and the banking industry. Well, that didn't last long because of unregulation. The banks were not regulated back then. 1929, the practice of the banking system caused an economic collapse that we hadn't seen in this country for a century. So the Great Depression occurred right at that time. So that's just some background history on where we are and why talking about this topic is so important. For the next 15 minutes, I want to share with you 5 things that I think are keys. And my topic is why your most important investment that I'm going to talk about is the investment in yourself. And I'm not speaking primarily, I'm going to give you 5 key areas that I think are important for us to make investments in. And the investment is in ourselves first. But before I do that, I want to share a couple of my mentors with you. The world-renowned Dr. John DeMartini, the cardiologist, who had a cardiologist, but discovered how to take his cardiology practice and do a bunch of marketing and develop it so that he began now to find and develop multiple cardiology practices. He began to license some of his processes and licensing opportunities for other cardiologists. He began to coach and mentor others and teach them how to multiply and expand their practices. One is and personal development coaches that I know, a guy that really inspired me when I went through a period of my life where something that I remember 10 years ago. He said, they asked him, what do you do? He said, I research, write, coach and speak, travel and teach. So that inspired me because he knew specifically what he offered, what his value was. The next guy that inspired me was a gentleman by the name of Mark Victor Hansen, co-author of the best-selling book, Chicken Soup for the Soul. He and Jack Canfield wrote that book. While people were telling him that it was impossible to write a book of stories that people would buy, he said no. He went to and he said, no, people will buy books about stories. He said, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sell 1.5 million in a year. And in a year and a half, once he did get the book published, he sold over 3 million copies of the book. Fast forward 10 years later, over 50 million copies of The Soul has sold worldwide. He sold the company, made a bunch of money. One of the great, innovative, inspirational people that I know through mentorship. Another gentleman, Les Brown, African-American gentleman who came on the scene back in the 80s, talking about him being the most. PBS did a special about him, and he went on talking about all of the things that he could do to motivate other people and how he motivated himself. And the poem stuck with me. Here it is almost 20 years later, probably 20 years later, and I still remember the poem, and I'll share it with you. If you want a thing bad enough, go out and fight for it. Work day and night for it. Give up your time, your peace, and your sleep for it. If all that you dream is useless and worthless without it, if you would gladly sweat for it and fret for it and plan for it, and lose all of your terror of the opposition, if everything that you do comes against you, if all that you hope and dream about falls apart, with the help of God, you will surely get it. He spoke this poem that gave me encouragement, gave me strength, and I count him as one of the mentors in my life. The next gentleman that mentored me, never met the gentleman, but his books mentored me, his tapes and CDs mentored me, is a gentleman by the name of Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn was an internationally known business philosopher, wrote all these best-selling books. A couple of his books, one was 7 Strategies for Wealth and Happiness. The next book that I found inspiration in was called The 5 Major Pieces of Life Puzzle. And the third book that I found inspiration in was The Day That Turns Your Life Around. He conducted a seminar called the Weekend Seminar. I watched, I think, maybe 15 or 16 hours of his tapes, and I got so inspired. It gave me so many methods and steps and strategies. I use them in my job, and I became, after 10 years of being employed in this company, I became the employee of the year after listening and attending Jim Rohn's weekend seminar. The final guy I want to mention to you is Robert Kiyosaki. He wrote the book Rich Dad. Many of you on this call know who he is, have been inspired by his book. You remember the four quadrants that he talked about? You start as an employee, move to a place of self-employment, then from there you move to owning a business, and from there you move to the place of being an investor. He talked about the steps involved and the importance of not just remaining an employee, but using your God-given talents and abilities to become a value creator. So the 5 steps that I want to talk to you today about, I've got a little less than 9 minutes. I'm going to try to hit them really quick. The first step is nutrition. It's very important for us today to be aware of nutrition. I've listened to some of the doctors and some of those of you that are in the medical industry on the call today talk about some of the specifics about nutrition. I too agree with you. I'm very motivated to pay attention to what I put in my mouth. Never heard it said that way, but a business philosopher was talking about. They asked him, "What is so important about 2021? What do you want people to be aware of?" He says, "Be careful of what you put in your mouth." And then he began to talk about the importance of using a diet that's a plant-based diet. And he talked about how we're physiologically designed with all the materials of the earth. Man is technically made from the substance of the earth. We're made with all of the metals, the copper, the zinc, the aluminum, the magnesium. All the minerals that are in the earth are in our body. And when we intake and ingest consistently products that have preservatives in them, we are contaminating ourselves and our digestive system. So in order to deal with health and wellness and to invest in ourselves, we need to invest in our nutrition. Just understanding is important. Food, vegetables that are not in a box or a carton or a can. Eat vegetables and fruit that are natural, that are in touch with our very hand. Digestion is another important part of nutrition, making sure that you have good digestion, and to get good digestion, you need more plant-based foods. Building up our immune system, that's the other key in nutrition. People 65 and older in that age group have a difficult time fighting off the virus because of their immune system. Not having enough vitamin D, not eating the right nutritions and vitamins and supplements, limits our ability to fight off this COVID-19 vaccine. And so we have to strengthen our immune system by intaking more vitamin D and being more aware of what we put in our mouth and what we eat. The next point, number 2, is the intellectual growth that is required. To invest in ourselves, we have to invest in our intellectual growth. And that's what I've spent the last 10, 15 years focusing on. How can I learn things that I've never heard of? How can I invest in my knowledge? How can I invest in my intellect? Because the intellect has a couple of different sides of it. One is that the intellect could be your worst enemy. In other words, the memories that you have of past traumatic events and traumatic experiences that you've gone through, and I don't know the lady's name, but she talked about generational, how you can carry on the memories of past generations, how that can get in your genes. So your intellect can become your worst enemy because it can cause you to relive the trauma that you've experienced. And the mind does not know the difference between something that happened 10, 20 years ago and what is happening today. That's why when you see a celebrity and they're talking about their experience growing up, and because they're experiencing it again as if it happened, as if it is happening right now. When I worked in mental health, one of the things that discouraged me about the therapeutic milieu that we used was that we had these children that we were preparing for adoption. We would send them to therapy, and the therapist would ask them to relive the trauma that they experienced. We're asking a child, an 8-year-old child, to relive the fact that his foster mother, put him in an oven and burned him. we're asking these kids to relive what it felt like to go through those experiences again. And so they're stuck right in their past because of all the trauma, because the therapy that we were using, caused them to relive and go back and open those scabs up again. And so I felt it was very disheartening to work in that industry because you had to, when Medicaid got involved, now you had to have 2 therapeutic sessions a week rather than 1, because now you can bill for it and your business model was based upon billable. We did a great disservice to many of those kids by making them go through this kind of therapy that caused them to relive those experiences, resulting in them having an inability to deal with today and to process things for today. Human intelligence has the ability to enact great things, to conceive strategic plans and to problem solve and to imagine and innovate unimaginable. Just ask Elon Musk, gentleman that came from South Africa as a child, wanted to come to America, fled to Canada as a teenager, got off the plane and made his way, wanted to make his way to one of the major cities so he can study engineering, and took odd jobs. Alberta, worked in coal mines and gas stations, and made just enough money to get to the next town. But he had a goal and a vision, intellect working in mankind, driving him, giving him a destination of a place that he wanted to be. Finally got in school in America, got into an Ivy League school, went to Stanford, studied engineering and physics, and left after a couple of years and decided he's going to start an online business. Started a online Yellow Pages company where there was none at the time. Sold that business a few years later for a couple of $1 million. Then went from there to starting PayPal with a friend, made that into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, took the money from that, and he still was driven toward his objective of studying engineering. Then he decided he's going to work on electric cars, which was his passion. Started SpaceX and AI and Tesla and all of these different enterprises. The intellect working in man, creating all of this ingenuity. He was focused and driven. And this is how the intellect works for us if we allow it. But if we're focused on the past, the intellect becomes our enemy. It works against us. If you're going to invest in yourself, you have to invest in intellectual growth. The next 2 things, I have 2 minutes to go. The next one is physical fitness. It's important for us to invest in ourselves and our physical body, to have some kind of interest in building and maintaining strength. As you get older, your muscles get weaker, your bones get less dense, and you become frail. It's important for us to understand we have to maintain some kind of physical workout schedule. It doesn't matter if you just go for a walk. If you get a 5-pound set of dumbbells and lift those every day a couple of times, do a couple of sets of those every morning. Get the muscles firing every day. Get the muscles to remember that it's important to continue to produce. Creating an exercise regimen for yourself every day. There are about 168 hours in the week. 1/3 of that is about 56 hours. It's important for you not to focus on sleeping 8 hours a day, because now you're sleeping 1/3 of your life away. It's important for you to understand you have about 56 hours that you use for your personal hygiene and the physical care and upkeep of your body. And so you only have 56 hours a week left to do anything that is progressive or that's going to impact your life. Invest the time that you have, spend less hours, get up.
Wow, Jerry, I never knew that you could preach. I didn't mean to interrupt, but we have to get into our next session. Okay. But if you can stay with us for a few minutes,
I will.
That was just amazing. I'm really, really inspired. I didn't know that. So
we'll
this is a different. Yes, I'm inspired. Weren't you all as inspired? Yes. Okay, so our next, as you know, that Elton and I have a passion. Everybody in this world has a mission in life, and our mission is jobs and business. And one of the things that we are doing in our lives is we are helping facilitate information sharing and networking. We believe that if you wrote a book, you need to tell the world about it. And I have a marketing background. And so I want to share my expertise to help build a better world. Because I truly believe that when people can feed their families and be self sustaining, it's a beautiful, wonderful world. So this is a roundtable discussion, and Jerry, you can stay as long as you can and leave. But we have a fantastic group of people, and I will put you with our moderator, Ramona, and we'll just go around the room and introduce ourselves, and we'll talk about careers in healthcare and wellness. And I might add Carol Brown because she's here and she's just a wonderful speaker too. So yeah.
I think
So
we should first add, let Miss Alyssa Spa introduce herself, and Mr. Frankie Cruz, and I see a Mr. Ramigan. If you can just introduce yourself and just simple comment, and we'd love to have you on. And also, I see there Mr. Harold Caldwell, Reverend Harold Caldwell. Just introduce yourself and